Welcome to Breaking the Standard, where we are closing the communication and knowledge gap for small businesses in GovCon. I'm Aubrey Gainfort, and today we have very special guest Steven Koprince here with us. Steven, welcome.
Well, thank you, Aubrey. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah, if you could just introduce yourself for our listeners, that would be great.
Sure. Well, I am a recovering government contracts attorney. Yes, 16 and 17 years representing clients in the federal government contracting space. I represented my firm and I over at clients during that time, mostly small businesses, but some medium and some large international companies as well. So I've been there and done that as a government contracts attorney. Had the opportunity then to essentially sell my practice to a couple partners and took advantage of that opportunity. And now I'm still involved in government contracting as an educator with Govology, which is an organization that provides trainings to government actors, procurement officials alike. And I also serve on the board of directors of a wonderful organization, tribally owned organization that has 8A and non-8A small businesses underneath it.
Well, I'm very happy to have you. And if you don't know Steven, you have to go follow him on LinkedIn because he has a lot of really interesting information and articles that he posts and has a lot of information out there if you're not familiar with it. So you have to go check it out. And I will link Govology in the show notes when this airs. Today, we're going to talk about the Small Business Administration Scorecard and the data behind it. So I guess first and foremost, what is the SBA Scorecard?
Yeah, that's, I know some folks who are listening are probably already familiar with it, but not everybody is. And it's good to just kind of get the big picture of what card is and why it exists in the first place. And so, the federal government, as I'm sure our listeners know, has contracts reserved for small businesses and for various socioeconomic subcategories of small businesses: 8A, hub zone, service disabled veteran-owned, and woman-owned small businesses. Those are the major categories. And each year, the SBA, according to statute, is supposed to essentially give a report on how the agencies are doing meeting their goals. The government has government-wide goals for achieving 5 categories of prime contracting, the ones I just talked about: small business and those 4 major socioeconomic subcategories. Those goals are set in statute. For example, there's a 23% small business goal that's set in statute. And then the SBA is supposed to come in every year and give a report as to essentially how well the government is doing meeting those goals that are set forth in the statute, and that SBA individually negotiates different agencies. And so what you have each year is an annual report, usually in July, sometimes in August, maybe sometimes a little earlier in June, in which the SBA gives a report on what happened in the previous fiscal year. And so we're now in the 2023 fiscal year. And so the report that came out recently was about the government's performance in fiscal year 2022, which is the last completed.
So I wanted to talk to you about this for a couple of reasons, but the first one was, you wrote something about this on LinkedIn and it caught my attention because you called it a mixed bag. And I would like to talk a little bit more about that because basically you shared on your post that we hit 3 of the 5 prime contracting goals and we missed the women-owned small business and the hub zone again. But I'd like to know why, I guess, behind the mixed bag, like what does that mean? And is that a good thing, a bad thing? Like I guess it caught my attention.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, and I'm glad it did. I feel like every year I'm saying the same sort of thing. And I should preface this by saying what I'm about to say is a bunch of opinion, and it's not opinion, not Govology's or anybody else. It's just my personal opinion. But what happens is, regardless of presidential administration, whatever party someone belongs to. They were doing this under Obama and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Donald Trump, and now under President Biden, is that the SBA has taken it upon itself, this is nowhere in the statute, to issue letter grades to the government as a whole. A letter grade like you get in school, A, B, C, D, E, I guess not E, but F. They skip the E because excellent, and F, I guess, is fail or flunk or whatever. They always skip the E. Mm-hmm. So they're giving letter grades. That statute doesn't say anything about letter grades, it just says give us SBA on how the agencies are doing. And so the SBA, year after administration after administration, comes out with this press release that accompanies their report. And the press release inevitably says, yay, the government's doing great. We awarded more dollars, more raw dollars to small businesses last year than any previous year. And you could write this report. It's the same every year. I mean, it's like almost a fill in the blank press release. And then it gives the government an A. The government almost always gets an A. In fact, year after year, it gets an A. And then most of the agencies, because SBA rates the government as a whole, most of the agencies the government rates also get A's. And last year, the SBA individually rated 24 executive branch agencies and gave 20 of them A's. 20 of them got A's. So the government as a whole got an A. And so if you read just the headlines and the press release, it's like, wow, the government is just knocking it out of the park when it comes to small business contracting. They're doing great. They gave the most dollars ever to small businesses, and they got an A. What more do I need to know? And unfortunately, in my opinion, that's the sort of cheerleading for the dollars, this focus on the raw dollars, and we have termed repeatedly great inflation by awarding A's, it does service to small businesses, because when you look behind those headlines, what you find out is that of those 5 goals, those 5 prime contracting goals, the government was asked to achieve: small business, woman-owned small business, small disadvantaged business, service disabled veteran-owned small business, and hub-zone small business. The government last year achieved only 3. That's 60%. They did not achieve the woman-owned small business and hub-zone small business goals. And so you wouldn't get that sense just by seeing the headline. You'd be like, wow, look at all those dollars, look at the A. And so to me, it's a mixed bag. Sure, it's wonderful that they achieved the other 3 goals and surpassed them. The goal for small business is 23%. The government did 26.5. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
But the government missed the other 2 goals and missed 40% of its goals. And on top of that, and I know we're going to talk about this a little later, the raw number of small businesses doing business with the government, again, for like 10 or 11 years in a row, that has happened, where the number, so there's some bad news mixed in there. And my longtime opinion has been, by awarding these A's and trumpeting the raw dollars, which, by the way, is just a factor primarily of increased government spending and inflation. It's not a surprise that every year the government awards more to small businesses when overall government spend is up. Then it takes the focus off of the things that need to improve. And in this case, it's hub zone. In this case, it's woman owned. And it's really a crisis, I think, in terms of the number of small businesses who are actually getting government contracts. So that's, to me, why it's a mixed bag. There's absolutely news to cheer, but there's also cause for real concern. And unfortunately, the SBA focuses on the first half of that equation and pretty much sweeps the rest under the rug. And that, to me, is not really doing a service to the small businesses they're supposed to represent.
It's so interesting when I read this, and, when we chatted before, that, there's not a whole lot of focus, and I understand why, because it's not positive, but doesn't mean that there can't be something done about it to move it in the right direction, about the actual number of, small businesses declining in the government. And because I think this A across the board thing, which now I have a question about that, and I need just a hypothetical question. If they only met 3, then why didn't they get like a B minus? Like, I'm just trying to think of, because I saw the A's. I work under Homeland Security, and Homeland Security got an A, and they're very proud of it, and they work very hard for it. But if that's the case, then maybe there should have been a caveat, like, we got an A here, here, and here, but we really need to work on this, because it kind of sounds like they shoved the other 2 under the rug.
Yeah, and Homeland Security, to give it credit, did do better than most. I believe they hit all 5 of their prime contracting goals.
They did, yeah.
They did, and so they were more deserving than some others. NASA, for example, only got 1 of the 5 goals and still got an A. So they missed 80% of their goals, and they got an A. It's a matter of the formula. The SBA has got this formula in place. Again, this is not mandated except in very large particulars by Congress, but the way that the formula ends up working out is that you can miss a lot of, in NASA's case, 4 out of 5 goals and still end up with an A based on you did in subcontracting and how you did in kind of setting up your Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. And that's not to say those things aren't important, but
Right.
to me, it's like saying, well, this student is the valedictorian, even though he or she, failed 40 or 50 or 60% of their classes or 80 classes, but did really well in the last class. So I don't know. If it was me, I would have to set a threshold that says to get an A, you have to have achieved all your goals. Like that's it. Like I don't care what the rest of the formula says, because and the prime contracting goals, by the way, are supposed to be the largest chunk of that score. The more than 50% of that score is supposed to be prime contracting goaling achievement. And I would also say, look, I mean, we've got to do something about the decline in the number of small primes, because that news is always just really below the radar, and is not really taken into account in all these A's. We're doing so great, but what you have is a pie of dollars that's getting bigger and bigger, but it's getting cut into bigger and bigger pieces. There are fewer and fewer companies that are actually getting those small business dollars, and that's a real concern, given that the one of the fundamental underlying purposes of having small business preferences in the first place is to grow a broad and robust industrial base, and that industrial base is shrinking. It's shrinking and shrinking, and that's that's not underlying purpose of having these small business programs in the first place.
So with that, like what could that, I guess I was really surprised to see that, because I thought, it was increasing. So, I, like many people, from what I've seen and read. So I guess what could that mean or, indicate for like future participation, especially for small businesses in GovCon? Because if you're not aware of that, I would assume that the market's so big and great that maybe I don't need to jump into creating my own business or going after something. And I guess since you've been in this world for such a long time, I mean, what does that mean? And like, how can small businesses maybe interpret that and use that to either their benefit or their future business decisions?
Yeah, I mean, this data is, I think, helpful for small businesses, other than to just, hey, understand that this rosy news isn't all rosy. I mean, and I think that is, by the way, one of the messages that is inadvertently perhaps sent by SBA here, is that you get into the federal market and the contract just rain down like manna from heaven, right? And so I've had people essentially tell me, hey, if I get 8A certified, like I'm just going to wake up every morning and there's going to be a new contract just to my house. And it doesn't work like that. That doesn't mean that it's not still a great business to be in, but you do have to be aware that it's a changing market, and so that almost 50%, or depending on the stats, you look at more than 50% decline in the raw number of small businesses that are getting government contracts over the last 10 or 11 fiscal years. And that's a real concern. And so that can affect strategies in a couple ways. And one could be, I just don't want to be part of this market at all if it's shrinking. And I'm not sure. I mean, there's still more than 60,000 companies that are small businesses doing business with the government. So there's still still a lot out there. Although next year maybe it's going to be under 60,000. I don't know. But it may mean a couple things for you. It may mean, first of all, let's take a look at these grades that SBA is getting, but the goals that they're missing, because they're missing the woman-owned small business goal, they're missing the hub zone goal, and one can argue that getting an missing those goals offers very little incentive for the agencies to do better. But there are contracting officers out there who, despite this grade inflation, are still going to try to hit those numbers. They're still going to, and small business liaisons and so forth, they're still going to try to hit those numbers. So that can help you decide, like, hey, hub zone certification might be a really valuable thing to get right now, because the government's having trouble meeting that 3% goal, so they can go out there and do that. It also sends kind of a macro signal to contractors that, hey, since we've got this shrinking base of small businesses that are doing business with the government, I shouldn't be expecting to have those contracts just flying in the second I set up my company. In fact, I may want to step back and understand that I may want to go after some of the low-hanging fruit first, such as simplified acquisitions, such as low-price technically acceptable awards, where I can build a base of past performance to be more competitive. I may want to subcontract first, and so I understand the federal government market better. I may want to find teaming partners. Let's say that I can't get a hub zone, I just don't qualify. Maybe I can team up with one to go after a contract that we wouldn't otherwise either one be really competitive for. And there's lots of opportunities in government contracting for teaming as well. So, this sort of data can I think help small businesses strategize whether they're entering the federal market or whether they're still in it, as to you can see these trends, you can see which certifications the government may be pushing, and you can get the sense that, of course, as the number of small businesses shrink, but the dollars awarded to them grows, that means that the average size is growing too. And so that means that you may have to either be larger before you're able to pursue those opportunities, or adopt some sort of teaming strategy such as subcontracting or joint ventures to be competitive in with the larger dollar value contracts.
That's really great. So many really great suggestions. So if you're listening to this, don't look at this as a discouraging thing. There's so much data here that could really be used to your benefit. And since we're talking about data, one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about, because you mentioned this when we were chatting before, when we're going back to the scorecard, is some of the information that's on there, it looks like might be double counted or not falsified. I feel like that's such a strong word, but like maybe not completely use, like one category or one way, and that's it. So could that possibly also impact, the prime contracting goals that were met? Do you think maybe if they didn't do it that way, that it would have, maybe shaken out differently?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it, and I agree with you, Aubrey. I mean, it's not falsified data because the state lets them do that. I mean, they're just following what the law lets them do. But by them, I mean the SBA and procuring agencies. But for those who are unaware, the same dollar be counted as many as 5 times. Remember, there's 5 categories we're tracking, right? Small business and those 4 subcategories. Now, a particular contract can only be set aside for one of those categories at a time. But if you say you award a contract to a small business, and it just so happens that the contracting officer goes to SAM and finds out that small business is also woman-owned, then the contracting officer gets to count that dollar twice, both toward the small business goal and toward the woman-owned goal. Mm-hmm. If it turns out that company's also an SDVOSB, well, now that same dollar is counted 3 times. If it's also HUBZone, 4 times. It's also SDV 5 times. And so, every year there are complaints about from some in government contracting. Well, that's not really right. The companies with, we're counting the same dollar repeatedly. So when it comes time to look at these goals, it's some say that's a skewed picture anyway of how well the government's doing, because the same dollars are being counted in some cases. And I think, and nowhere is that clearer than in the case of the woman-owned small business program. And then this is a case of 2 things. It's a case of, well, that's pretty amazing statistically. I'm about to tell you what that is, and a case of again the SBA spinning the facts in a positive direction, when in fact I think the overall data in this case is pretty negative. So here's what happened with women-owned small business in fiscal year 2022. The government missed the 5% goal. The government missed the 5% goal, but it wasn't extremely far off. It was 4.57%. 4.57%. Round that up, it's 4.6. Mm-hmm. It's not 5%. And it's bad that the government couldn't get 5%, but 4.57% doesn't look terrible. It looks like, we got a little work to do. 28.1 billion, and that's a lot of money. $28.1 billion awarded to women-owned small businesses. Now, the question is, how many of those $28.1 billion came from contracts that were restricted to women-owned small businesses? How many of those were women-owned small business set-asides and sole sources, in which case only women-owned small businesses were eligible for that money? And how much of that money came from double counting some other species of award, such as an 8A contract or a small business contract? Well, it's pretty shocking. 1.56 billion came from women-owned restricted contracts. 1.56. That means 5.5% of the dollars awarded to women-owned businesses came women-owned restricted contracts, and the other 94.5%, if I'm doing my math right, came from double counting contracts. So in its press release, the SBA is like, "Yay! There were more women-owned in fiscal 22 than 21, which I guess is good that they increased that, but the number is still so low. And
Mm-hmm.
so when companies are going out there and saying, I got my woman-owned small business certification, where the heck are the woman-owned small business set aside, since the government's awarding 28 billion to woman-owned? The logical inference is, well, there must be tons of woman-owned small business set asides out there, and they're not. They're not. They're getting most of their 4.57% by double counting revenues that were generated under other types of contracts. And again, not to say that they're doing anything wrong. That is exactly what they are allowed to do, they being the agencies and the
Mm-hmm.
SBA.
Mm-hmm.
However, it gives a misleading impression that there are these contracts out there in which having that woman-owned small business certification is essential to winning, and 1.56 billion is nothing to sneeze at, but it's only 5% of the total dollars that were awarded to women-owned, which was shocking to me. And so that can, to me, it says, wow, that woman-owned small just, it might as well get it if you qualify, but it's not nearly as valuable at this point in time as you would think it would be, given that the goal is 5% a dollar.
I mean, when you break the data down like that, which I think is helpful, you can, and I feel like if they were they were a little bit more transparent about that, or they didn't double count it for that purpose only, I think it would make women-owned small businesses understand that there are some opportunities, but there's not as many as you think, and we don't just throw them out to everybody. I mean, my agency, we have hit all of our goals. We're one of the subsets underneath of Homeland Security, but every year I'm like, who makes these numbers? Like, how do we
Right.
how do we get to these numbers? Because sometimes we're doing really great, and then you have a really large requirement that's not suitable for a small business, and then the number just upticks and shoots all of our small business goals out the window because we were doing really well until then. So I think the data behind that is actually really interesting, and I am going to link the scorecards for every agency, as well as the article that came out to talk about the scorecard. And that way, if anybody that's listening wants to know more about it or has your own opinions, you can reach out to us and share them with us, because I'd be really, really, really curious to hear what you think. But I have one more question for you, since you've been in this realm for such a long time, is what advice would you give to small businesses that are looking to get into GovCon or already working in GovCon and are trying to, take it to the next level? What would you offer them?
Yeah, and so I mean, if you're first trying to get in, I think to the government space, I think it's that situation again where you have to have a couple things. You have to be patient. I've heard it enough times and to believe it, that it takes on average 18 months to earn your first contract after you first go out there and try. And so you have to have the reasonable expectation that it's going to take a lot of work to get there. And you have to have a plan to do it. You have to have a methodical plan, in which case, may involve getting some of these certifications if you can, or teaming with others who have them, keeping in mind that those certifications may give you access to opportunities that you wouldn't have had otherwise, but that aren't going to rain down from heaven. You want to mark your capabilities first, and the certifications after that. And the government wants companies who are going to be qualified and capable to do their work. I'm also biased as someone who used to be in this field. I'm not anymore. So this is not a hire me thing, but use expert advice when you can, if you can afford it. When it comes to legal, don't try to be your own lawyer. When it comes to accounting, don't try to be your own accountant. Those sorts of things in this space, because it can get pretty complicated unless you have those those capabilities yourself. Again, consider going after some of those low-hanging fruit first. Consider being a subcontractor if you're a small business. Small primes are looking for smalls to help them get their subcontracting goals, and that's a great place to get introduced to the federal market without all the red tape that comes from being a prime contractor. So small businesses, large primes have subcontracting plans in which they're supposed to typically award certain subcontracts to those same 5 categories of small businesses we've been talking about. And so connect with those SBLOs, small business liaison officers, and get to know them. Get in. Usually they have a vendor database, and you them and start working with them. Government contracting, whether it's at the prime level and especially at the prime subcontract level and the teaming level, it's often just a people business, just like anything else. I mean, the government and primes alike want contractors that they trust, that they know, and so, yeah, we have a competitive process to get there, but it's, part of that is building that reputation, that past performance, et cetera, et cetera. So, having that long-term, and knowing what the market looks like, making a plan to maybe start with smaller prime contracts or with subcontracts and then build from there, using teaming relationships as appropriate, but not when you don't need them, of course. Those are the things that over time have taken some of my clients that I worked with from small businesses to pretty large businesses, those who've succeeded that way. But you got to have that patience. It may take a few years before you're up and running, and you got to understand that there's no shortcuts in this space. You've got to put in the hard work and develop those capabilities and have a product or service that is going to be something that the government or large primes or both want to buy, and not just rely on the fact that you're a small business, woman-owned, service-disabled veteran. That's the icing on the cake, but it's not what your customer is buying.
I don't think I could have said that any better. So I am so glad that you got to come on and be here with me today. And if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, and so way right now is two ways, both electronic. I'm not practicing law anymore, so I no longer take calls, and people call me up and they say, can I get your pick your brain about a legal matter? And I say, no, you can't, because I'm not I'm no longer practicing law. So I'm sorry, but here's some folks who can help you with that. But if you have feedback on this, or want to learn more about what we do at Govology and our et cetera, I'm more than happy to hear from listeners. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. As you mentioned, I am pretty active on there, posting things that I think are of interest. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn and join our group of interested government contractors in a LinkedIn group called Govology Nation. And I'm also often posting on there along with other folks who are experts in their field, and that not necessarily attorneys, but government contracts accountants and proposal writers and others who give their time to give presentations on Govology. So that's a great way to reach me. You can also send me an email directly. I will be candid with you. I don't check my email account every single day anymore. It's one of the pleasures of being part-time and having other things to do, but I do check it regularly. So it's S Koprince. That's SKOPRINCE. That's SKOPRINCE at Govology.com. And Govology is GOVOLOGY. So skoprince at Govology.com. And if you email me, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Just understand it may be a day or two, but I will be happy to get back to you either through LinkedIn or Govology.
Perfect. And if you're listening to this and you have opinions, thoughts, or ideas, or you want to hear something else on the show that we haven't talked about, shoot me an email at breakingthestandard@gmail.com, and make sure to go follow us on Apple and LinkedIn. And until next time, bye.